Okay.
All right, awesome. Welcome. Thank you for coming out today. We have some live faces, which is awesome and always to have. We have a cup of coffee together. And on a wonderful Sunday morning.
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome to everyone online. Hi guys, thanks for being with us again this morning. Hope you all had a good week. All the kids are back at school. All the works and the wheels are turning. Back to life.
Good.
It's good to have you with us.
Yes, yeah. Okay, well, this morning I just want to do something slightly different. I just want to take a moment to read something, a little meditation or a prayer that someone sent to me. And I want us to just take a moment. If you want to close your eyes, whatever you want to do, but just to, just take a moment, put everything aside, the things that we're all thinking about. And just for a moment, let's just listen. So he says, try to think of the reign of God as Jesus' way of saying the big picture, or in the largest frame. It is not a place as much as an ultimate perspective, the perspective of God. Whenever we open ourselves to the big frame, our little frame of reference shrinks into its proper perspective, sometimes even falls away entirely. Life can't be based on what is passing. It can't be based on transitory images. Instead, we have to base it on the lasting truth, on the truth of who we are, on the truth of this creation, which God says is very good. Our problem seems to consist in the fact that we're convinced of not being good. And we need a great deal of trust to believe God's pronouncement that everything He created is very good, even in its imperfect state. We seem to believe that only perfect things are lovable. Yet the Gospels say very clearly that God loves imperfect things, which is really everything. Perfection is invariably our own self-created notion, manufactured largely in our own thinking mind or by our culture. Thus, it is both delusional and finally self-defeating, as well as a major obstacle or a major enemy and obstacle to loving what is right in front of us. Only God can lay claim to perfection, yet we keep plowing ahead. We demand a desired and an expected response from ourselves and the world, even when we seldom get it. When we then use this disappointing information to notice everyone else's imperfection. Such a false crusade only gets more compulsive and demanding the older we get. Those who don't have anything to prove or to protect believe that they are loved as they are. But we who have spent our lives ascending the spiritual ladder have a harder time hearing this truth. For the truth isn't found at the top of our striving, but down at the bottom in our deepest nature. By trying to climb the ladder upwards to Christ, we miss Christ, who comes down through the incarnation. The proclamation of the reign of God is a radical political and a theological statement. It has nothing to do with being perfect. It has to do with living inside the big frame, the final and the full state of affairs, the lasting perspective. The gospel is before all else a call to live differently, so that life can be shared with others. In other words, the gospel is ultimately a calling to a stance of simplicity, vulnerability, dialogue, and humility. These are the only virtues that make communion and community and intimacy possible. So I really thought that was quite suitable, seeing that we spoke about the kingdom of God, the reign of God last week. Just a really valuable little attachment to that. Righty, but this morning, we're going on in the book of Mark. We've decided to take some time. Okay, bye, Liffy. All right, readjusting. There, all the viewership fell by 50%. Right. Last week we spoke about Jesus' first sentence in the book of Mark. Quickly highlighted why Mark is such an interesting gospel. It's the one we all neglect, but it's actually, as far as we know, the earliest one, and some argue the most historically accurate gospel. But it's so strange because it doesn't elaborate so much like the book of Matthew might, or Luke, or the all different John. It's kind of straight to the point, and it seems quite strange when you read it, and I think that's why sometimes we just ignore it, because it's not spectacular enough, I guess, for us. But Jesus' first sentence in the book of Mark, we mentioned last week, goes something like this: the time is up, the kingdom of God is here, the reign of God is here. Change your life and believe or trust the message, or trust the news, or ultimately really trust the intention of the one who is doing the invasion, or who is invading, right? And so then the very next sentence, which is just one or two verses further, in fact 2 verses further, is where we're going to be focusing this morning, and that we find in Mark 1 verse 17. So after God announces through Jesus his intent to call us to adjustment of our understanding, that the time is there, that the kingdom of God is about to break, it's at hand, or it's about to manifest, or we use the word invade, Jesus then makes things very personal when he meets Simon and Andrew at the Sea of Galilee, where they're busy fishing. And so this call, which at the beginning seems very general, very elaborate, now becomes very personal. And it starts to affect people's personal lives. If you think about the life of Andrew and how drastically it changed from the moment that Jesus encountered them here. Not only did they leave what they understood, they left their work, they left their, well, I wouldn't know if fishing is a calling. Some would argue that fishing is a calling. Some who have other jobs would still argue that fishing is a calling. But they left their jobs, they left what they knew, they left their way of providing for themselves, and as far as I understand, Simon Peter had a wife. So it now becomes personal. It's now no longer just a theory of something that might happen. Peter is confronted with the choice of what he's going to do now that Jesus is calling him personally. So that's where we pick it up in Mark 1 verse 17, and let me read it to you from the King James. It says, "And Jesus said to them, 'Come after me, I will make you to become fishers of men.'" Just that sentence, that's all that Mark records, and then he moves on to the next topic, right? So we're going to be spending a bit of time there this morning. I want to be quite brief this morning, and break it up into 3 little portions. The first portion is "come after me." The word there means come in my direction. Come in my direction. In other words, follow me. And this is not a sending so much as it's a call to walk in the same direction as Jesus is traveling. Now, if you've been a Christian for a long time, and even if you haven't, you know the direction of Jesus' life. You know what happens to him. There are times when people love him, but most of the time he's ridiculed by those who are important, those whose opinions really, really count. So it's a call to come in the direction that he walks. Secondly, he says, "I will make you." And I think this is the little portion that really hit home for me, and has been hitting home for me over a very long period in my life. I realized that if the gospel, if the news of God's kingdom is going to become personal in any real and material way, it's going to be in this sentence: "I will make you." That God is personally interested in the transformation of our very lives, right? I know most of us, sometimes, I know myself, sometimes the things that really interest me is not how he will make me, but what he will give me. You know, God, I'm here, but what will you give me? How will you bless me? What are you going to do for me? But ultimately, I think this simple message calls us back to the core of what it really means to cooperate with God in his kingdom. It means to be open to become, or to be open to be made. And then as he makes us, it is so that we could become something. And so ultimately it seems like there's the purpose in the gospel, and the purpose of the calling of God on each one of our lives is to bring us to a place to become something. Not to have things, but to become something. And then lastly, the portion says here, to become the fishers of men. And so in this little step up, it ends with people. It ends with those around us. It ends externally, but it does not start externally. So let's take a moment just for the historical context. I believe it's important wherever we encounter the scriptures that we take time for the historical context. If we don't, we're going to be misapplying. So just a moment here for the historical context. People made their living out of fishing around the Sea of Galilee, right? It was a very well-known way of making your living. It was their full-time occupation, right? So this is the context of what's going on. Now, just to play a little bit of devil's advocate, this passage is not trying, and this will be a misinterpretation, it's not trying to tell us that only fishermen can follow Jesus. Like, that's not what it's saying to us. It doesn't mean that we need to become fishermen in order to be able to qualify to follow Jesus. And I'm stating the obvious here. Fishermen here Jesus uses their occupation as a metaphor for what he wants to do in them and also through them. So in other words, what I'm saying is that if Jesus walked into the jewelry shop of whoever it is, he'll use a metaphor for making jewelry. Like, that will actually work pretty well. It's a pity there weren't many jewelers back then, or maybe they weren't so interested. So the fishing idea is metaphor, right? Okay. So it is not saying that we need to apply techniques of fishing to the way we deal with people. Because many people have taken this, and their whole modus operandi in life is to get a hook and to put something nice on it to get people. That's not what this is trying to tell us to do, right? It is not supposed to be taken in such a literal manner to say, okay, so whatever we need to do, no matter what the method, it doesn't matter as long as the end is okay. That most definitely is not, I believe, what Jesus is asking us here today, or asking of any of us. We're obviously not also expected to leave any one of us today our full-time occupation to be able to follow Jesus in this way. So once we've cleared some of those things out, we need to then sit and say, what could this mean for us today, right? It also does not mean that we need to visit the Holy Land and walk around Galilee trying to find out exactly where Jesus walked. This is also not talking about that. So once we strip those things away, and once we clear them, pull them out the cupboard and put them on the shelf, what is left? What is the cupboard? What is the box? What is the message that Jesus really is conveying here to them? But also, how do we apply that to what we are today? What does this mean to us? Because I am fully convinced that God still, through His Spirit today, calls people in this way. He calls them into His kingdom. He calls them to be participants in His reign on earth. He's saying to us also today, the time has been up for a long time. Come and believe, trust my intention, think differently. But how does that pan out for us personally as individuals? We each have different contexts, cultures, work places, etc., etc., etc. So what can be said today to us when we allow this message of Jesus to speak to us in our time? Once we understand the historical context, so what? What does it hold for us? Now that we know and we take cognizance of the fact that Jesus isn't here in the sense that He was next to Simon, right? Don't get me wrong, but also don't get me right. He's not here. He's not walking. He didn't put sanitizer on this morning, right? So He's not here in the way that He was for Simon. So you can't expect, that's not what you're expecting from this call. It looks different than back then, right? Most of us are not fishermen, thank goodness. The church has been established for over 20 centuries or 2,000 years we've been here. Things have changed. We're no longer the minority somewhere in Galilee. There was a very particular mission that they were called into in Jerusalem, Judah, and the surrounding areas. They had a particular culture they had to deal with. They needed particular tools to deal with that culture. I think maybe Matthew 9, end of Matthew 9 and Matthew 10, the metaphor of the harvest that is ready and the sheep that are without shepherd. Jesus was very clearly pointing straight at the Jewish people of their time. And when He called laborers into the field, He was really talking about the disciples that would go into that particular field, right? So the first century mission to the Jewish people has been accomplished. Right? That mission has been accomplished. We know that. We live differently today. We have families. We work hard to look after them. Many of us, most of us have full-time jobs, sometimes mom and dad, to try and make that work. We're not saying Jesus is calling us out of our jobs in order to follow, right? Also, we have cars, we have WhatsApp, and the James Webb Telescope, for those of you who know what that is. So how might this apply today to our spiritual journey? And let's just take this step by step. Number one, come after me. This means to fall in after. It's not really so much ascending, but it's actually a following. And I think many times we have imbalanced the gospel because of the historical context. We've forgotten that to follow Jesus does not primarily mean to be sent. It primarily means to follow. It primarily means to walk into the footsteps of the type of life that Jesus lived and the type of person he portrayed for us. So what I mean by that is you'll find a lot of people going, but they're not following in Jesus' steps in their going. So many of us in Christianity, we follow maybe certain moral things that our tradition has given to us. Like, for instance, maybe you won't drink wine because it's a moral issue for you, but gossip is not. So we leave out some certain serious ethnical things we're willing to negate, we're willing to look over them, but we won't touch wine. Like it's a complete dissonance between what is really required of us. Primarily, all of us are called to follow, to walk into the footsteps of Jesus. Right? So the New Testament idea here of Jesus as a forerunner in the book of Hebrews and some of the writings of Paul is described as a forerunner or as a captain or as a firstborn, helps us to understand that Jesus wasn't only speaking to those there, but he's still speaking to us today, that he is still for us forerunner, captain. He still is for us someone who goes ahead of us, even in our life and in our situation. He goes ahead and we follow. Maybe Paul's theology and the idea of being in Christ, which was pretty new in Paul's time and has become almost second language for people who have gone to church for a very long time, makes us think that Jesus is actually inviting us not only on the journey of our lives, but he's actually inviting us into the fellowship with God. He's actually calling us into God. He's calling us into himself in some way. It doesn't make logical sense, but it makes spiritual sense to understand that we are some sense one with him. And he's calling us into, by that oneness, calling us into oneness also with God himself. And so the journey is not so much a journey of just our job and our kids and what we'll do when we're old, and it's the journey of into God. Is the journey that Jesus calls us into. Paul used, a lot of people don't know, but Paul actually gets this saying from a pagan like poem. But Paul's not afraid to use it because for Paul, this is the truth. In him we live, we move, and we have our being. And Paul is not afraid to use this because for Paul, this is truly the truth. And I think for us as Christians, we should be fully aware that this is also truth for us. We do not live in an external place from God. And so Jesus is not saying, come, I'm going to take you to God somewhere else. Jesus is saying, come experience God. Come spiritually in your personal life. Come walk into his reign. Come walk into his life for you. So, what if this invitation is still the loudest sound in the universe today? Jesus calling people to come after him. What is our directive? And what if this is our directive and still our direction as humanity? What if Jesus knew that we would wander off after things? We would wander off after people. We would wander off after leaders. We would wander off after cultural development. We would wander off after certain ideologies, some even religious ideas. We would constantly be detouring. But through all of that, he's still standing. And he's still saying, I've taken a bit of a detour on this one, but follow me, follow me. Jesus is so much more than just the Jewish historical figure or even the incarnation of the Word in flesh. He is something to admire in retrospect. He is also the shape of humanity that God is looking for us today as well as it was 2,000 years ago, and the direction and the shape of the future. In Him, we make sense of humanity and God. And in Him, God draws us unto Himself. The life of Jesus set humanity on a completely different trajectory, steadily steering us away from greed and power towards the virtues of humility and peace and love. And I want you to know that work, that job, if I can call it that, is still busy today. Today, Jesus doesn't do it by come sitting at our table and having a meal with us. But today He does this through His Spirit that He promised. And I don't know if you recall, but in John 17, Jesus says some really confusing things. Like, for instance, He says, it's better that I no longer be here. Come on now. This doesn't make any sense. But He says, it's better if I am no longer here with you. And why does He say that? It's because I'm sending the Spirit. And He will show you of me. He'll lead you. He'll draw you. He'll pull you. He'll push you. He'll make you change. He'll make you go faster and go slower. So it's an interesting thing that he would say that. Today, all of this is still true, and tomorrow it'll be still true. We have to see the long game, the large frame, the big picture, the ultimate and resounding truth that Emmanuel is God's desire, that He'll be with us, in us, and ultimately also through us. This invitation is as personal as it gets, and is a personal invitation to everyone here today hearing my voice, and even those who aren't hearing this sound wave. The invitation is still there, and it's personal. It's personal. It's personal, and it's for everyone. Follow me. Look what I did and follow me. This invitation is as personal as it gets, because as we'll see in a moment, it's about the inner man and its sense of being and becoming. It's internal first, but ultimately it lands in the hearts of those around us. So secondly, come after me, Jesus' statement, this is the one that means the most to me, is, I will make you to become. I will make you to become. That's a huge statement. I'm going to make you. Not I'll see how it goes, and we'll see how good you perform. And I know they didn't perform that well, most of them. But there's a promise here. For me, this is one of the, when Hebrews says that the promises of the new covenant is better than the promises of the old covenant, to me, this is one of those promises. I will make you. And this is a promise that's not only for the individual, it's also for the church at large. It's also a promise to humanity. I will shape you. And it's a promise. Right. So, an invitation from Jesus was never going to be easy to follow. You know where He went. You know, it was a hard road to follow. Eventually ended up on the cross. His road was littered with obstacles, challenges, rejection, growth, and pain, suffering. In my experience, one of the most difficult and painful things in life is personal transformation. In fact, I'm of the opinion, and I know many others are as well, that we will do anything but face personal transformation. We will change everything if we can just avoid personal transformation. And yet here it is at the very heart of the call. I will make you. And so if you are a follower of Jesus, this is the promise that you should seek before all the other things, the peripheral things, the things that He will add, as Jesus said. Jesus says in Matthew 5, He says, don't ask God for this. Father knows what you need. You seek the kingdom, right? You seek what the kingdom, the reign of God is about, and God will add to you what you need when you need it. See He uses the example of the mosi. What's a mosi? Swallow. I will add to you what you need. Okay. So, change is the hardest. And this is exactly what we are invited into, a making or a transformational process. Paul uses the Greek word we commonly use for the transformation of a butterfly from the caterpillar. We're very well aware with that. It's amazing how that happens inside the cocoon. I mean, it's absolutely mind-blowing that the same substance can make a crawling worm into a flying butterfly. Like it's just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, if you took a crawling worm with wings and he comes out and he's learned to fly inside there, that's a miracle on its own. But how does a crawling worm develop wings he's never used? It comes out and flies with them. It's absolutely crazy. But the word metamorphosis is exactly that. It is just as in nature, God bringing change. And so one thing I've realized in my own life is that running from transformation is what I'm really, really good at. And I will find other things. I will do the rituals you want me to do. I will say the things you want me to say, but don't bring me to a place where personal transformation is my only option, because it's the hardest place you can bring. And I sense it's true for most people. It's actually astounding how much personal transformation Jesus and the New Testament writers calls us to. And this is what Paul actually says then in that portion. Don't be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so it's a very clear understanding, a very clear pointing towards a place of transforming of the mind, which is the place of transforming for personal transformation. It's where it happens at the end of the day. But this is not just change for change's sake, because Jesus implicates himself personally in taking responsibility for us. And I know the images in the New Testament where he is shepherd and we are sheep, we like those because he brings us to the place where it's lekker. He takes us from the pen to the green fields, you know. But what the metaphors sometimes leave out, because the metaphor can't be fully comprehensive, is that between the pen and the green field is the place of transformation, is the cocoon. The place where it's really like fire, really. If you want any metaphor, and if you like to braai like we do, part of our culture to some degree, that fire transforms that wood, but you can understand how painful it is in the fire. But that's the way of thinking about what God does within us. He takes personal responsibility for each one of us, and he says, I will make you. I will make you. Now I know that you failed many times, and I know that I have failed many times, but the promise still is there for us to trust the intention and to buy into and to walk along with the call. I will make you. And if there's anything you take away from this morning, it's the sound of those words that still ring. Today they ring through my mouth, but I believe they ring spiritually right throughout this whole universe. I will make you. Maybe you remember what Jesus said when he said, look, I make all things new. Now, in that all things is also me and you. In that all things is our mind and our understanding. Right, so Jesus uses the euphemism of becoming an infant by suggesting that we are born again. And here he's really also implying that unless we engage transformation, which being born again is the ultimate transformative move, because what it in essence means is I give up what I know and I become like someone who knows nothing. That's the process of transformation. There's no transformation. There's no social transformation. There's no personal transformation unless we are willing to admit, I come to a place identified by, I know nothing. I'm a baby again. Show me, take me. So Jesus uses this to be born again, or many times he would say, you can't inherit, you can't see unless you become like a child again. And this is kind of what we're dealing with here. We're dealing with the mindset of saying, I know nothing, right? In fact, transformative, systematic salvation is exactly this. And I've always pushed for this, and I will continue to do so, that salvation cannot be defined by just missing a place with flames and going to a place with angels. That is not the essence of salvation. Salvation is transformative. Salvation is, I make all things new. And that includes me and you when he says, I will make you. Right. There's a faint echo of this in the call of Abraham in Genesis 12, if you know it, when God approaches Abraham in the account of Abraham, and he gives him in Genesis 12 the promise to Abraham. There's a lot in there, but you can summarize it by this. I will make you, and you will be. Now, in between those, we want the blessing, we want the people, we want children as the stars, we need the land and we need the kingdom. Yeah, they come. They eventually come. But at the core of that prophetic type of call, because as Abraham is seen as the father of the faith, what happens in his life is supposed to be a lesson for us of how God kind of deals with us as well to some degree. And at the center of that is, I will make you and you will be. And then it ends with, it says, I will make you and you will be blessing to all the families of the earth. And it's a faint, distant, I will call it an echo, even though it precedes Jesus' call in terms of chronology. But it's the same thing that Jesus says to Simon. Follow me, I will make you a fisher of men. Abraham didn't fish, so Jesus didn't use the fishing thing. But ultimately, it's all the same. Come, I want to make you so that you can be to others. When John the Baptist summarizes the ministry of Jesus in Matthew 3, he highlights two particular things. He says he will baptize you with fire and the Spirit. And it seems to me quite clear that fire is there characterized not by an experience of hyper joy somewhere or a great moment in time, but it's quite clear that fire there is there to separate, to bring separation, to clear the threshing floor, to burn some stuff, some chaff off, which simply means that fire there is the process of transformation. And at the same time, he's also speaking about the Spirit, which is God within us, pushing us, drawing us, teaching us. And it's really these two components, if you take a moment just to think about them, it's these components that transform us. It's the fire of life, experience, progress, degress, elation, depression, rejection, celebration. It's the fire and experience of life together with the push of the Spirit of God from within us. That's what makes us. That's what forms us. Jesus is calling us onto the potter's wheel. Not just back then, not just when you got saved, but today. Every day, every morning, after every moment of failure, after every moment of moral failure or failure in ethic, after every moment, the voice is still the same. The love in that voice is exactly the same as it was. The urgency in that voice is exactly the same. It never, ever changes. As I said earlier, this is a concealed promise of transformation, versus sometimes what we as Christians follow, which is really a promise of things and gifts and blessings. There's a difference between following God for what we get and following God for how He transforms us. And many times us as Christians, I include myself, we're asleep. We're asleep to the fact that we're actually just following for what we get. And when anyone approaches transformation, we are not willing to wake up to that, because it's easier just to follow God for what He can bring to us, for what He can give to us. Lastly, is the transformation to become something specific in your time and in your era and in your family and in your business and in your life for those that are around you. In Peter's moment, Jesus uses the idea of fishing, obviously, because he was a fisherman, but also because he had called the disciples to a particular mission to the Jewish people. That they were to go out, house by house, 2 by 2. They had a specific mission. He gave them power to do specific things in those moments to accomplish that mission. So the forming of the disciples was crucial towards their primary role in the first century, the fishers of men. Of this, they did a tremendous job against all odds. You just have to read a little bit of history to understand how unlikely it is for 12 fishermen to make it through Jewish persecution, Jewish leadership persecution, and to overturn eventually a whole empire would bow its knee. So they had to overcome their personal, cultural, and religious tradition, the Roman Empire that occupied them, that constantly persecuted them as a religious minority. But today, yet we are here because of the fruit of their labors. I'm almost done. The gist of this is simply that Jesus transformed the fishermen into able men who could do the job. And as we read a little bit earlier on in that reading, you don't need perfection to do the job. God doesn't need perfection to get the job done. Sometimes we think because the disciples were the disciples, we think they were perfect. They were most definitely not perfect. Even the Bible itself shows us very clearly they misunderstood often. They grew in understanding throughout the scriptures. Even Paul does that. They fought with one another because of misunderstanding and different understanding, which by that very fact we know that there was no perfection present in all of them. But God just did what needed to be done in them for them to become effective in what they had to do in their time. And this, I believe, if I think about that, I'm not longing for God to do something perfect in me. My vision is not to one day when you come to my funeral for me to lay there and say, here lays France, who was made perfect. Well, it's never going to happen, that I know. It's also not the point at all of Christianity. But transformation is the point. And specific transformation into what God is requiring of us. Maybe this is the clearest way to think about a calling in this light. Right. So, almost done here. They were formed for the task that needed to be done by them and in their time. They were the laborers of the harvest of Matthew 9 and 10, each one with a very peculiar gift, a talent in a calling. Paul and Peter were very, very different. Paul was a horrible fisher of men. Right? If you compare him to Peter. Because Paul would try what Peter done. He tried to heal someone and they'd beat him with sticks and chase him out the city. Peter healed someone and 5,000 come into the church. Now Paul was horrible at that. But Peter was horrible at his theology and understanding what needs to go forward. Peter had such a hard time understanding that this covenant, this Jesus, is for everyone. He really had trouble with that. Each one had a call and an understanding for what they needed to do. Jesus' invitation calls us to the same transformative experience. So we can, in our time, be able people to carry the weight of the dream of God in our time, in the earth and for our generation. This by becoming what He needs from us in our generation. Internal transformation in order to become something that can change the world around us. Now, God still calls us to walk in this direction. He is still interested in our transformation because He is interested in humanity. He is interested in the future of the human race. It's His delight, it's His baby, it's His vision, it's His desire, and it's His dream. So how do we understand this for today in light of these two verses? I finish with this now here. I'm still invading. Make adjustments. Trust my intentions. I will transform you to become an instrument amongst men. And so the message is still the same to all of us today. Taken outside of the historical context, it's still calling to us, it's still begging us, it's still inviting us, it's still entreating us to open up. All I'm pleading with you today is that you don't get caught in a type of religion where transformation is the last thing and everything else comes first. Then we're going to be missing the point. Transformation has to be center to our journey with God. Thank you for listening today. I hope that these words will continue with you a little bit longer, even as we stop. Thank you for tuning in online, and thank you guys for coming out. I don't take for granted the willingness to travel and be here with us in our home. Thanks so much.